able to work alongside my parents and spending more time with them. As it turned out, my mom passed away a couple years later, and so I would have never been able to have that kind of time with them if I hadn't done this. And I do not ever and will never regret making that. And it just makes me, also feel proud of what we've been able to do with the practices. My parents really started a lot of it, and my dad was very innovative and looked to do all kinds of things. But I think even what my sisters and I have been able to do is take it to that next level, and always trying to push ourselves to do more and give back. We've also been very involved. There's the running of the business, there's being knee-deep too much in the business, working on the business, and giving back to the community. And so we've been fortunate enough to have great people working for us that allow us to serve on other boards and whatnot. I haven't even talked about the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, which is something I'm really proud to be a board member on. And we have our property, we've sold the easement on our property that will keep our land in agriculture for perpetuity. So it's just something that also kind of gives back to the community as well. Did I answer the question? I don't know that I did.
It's very clear that you have a lot of compassion as well as empathy, and that spills over to your employees and to how you articulate what you do. So thank you so much for sharing. Sure. Thank you for being here, and thank you. Diana provided us with a little cheese for the day, so thank you so much for that. And let's give Diana a hand, and really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. Okay, thanks.
Well, as we move on, we're going to dive even deeper into this topic, and we're going to invite up a panel next that's going to talk to us, and we can see that they're going to talk to us a little bit more about, like in a granular fashion, about how can we innovate in this space. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. In the energy space, in the farms, like in the a fleet to farm program, in a lighting program, how can we actually optimize systems in a highly granular way? And so, just tearing off of this first presentation, we've heard somebody that's dealing with challenges, that's running a very green business. We're going to invite up some other speakers. And I'm going to invite up first Yasmin Eichmann, who's the former CEO of Nest and at Google. And she will maybe invite up our other speakers. Does that sound good? Yes? All right. So I think, yes. Oh, you need a minute. Okay. So we're going to take a sec. I thought you... Like that. All right, we're going to do a little switcheroo on the chairs. Yaz, if you want to come up and introduce yourself while we're doing this little switcheroo.
Sure. All right, great. So thanks, Billy. I don't think I'll need that. Yeah. So as Billy mentioned, I'm Yasmin Eichmann Data, and I am in the middle of a transition. I have just left Google after almost 20 years, and my latest stint was working on a new product that we've launched at the end of last year, which is Nest Renew, working in the demand response space. So have been all over Google, at Google X, and working on a lot of different things over the years, but one of the most rewarding was really getting up to speed in the energy space. And so really excited to get to be moderating this panel. So I'm going to actually ask you guys to come and have a seat, and then I'll probably just ask you to introduce yourselves.
Do we each have a seat?
So yeah, everyone.
Allie, do you want to sit here? Sure. And then we're in the same order.
Still not done. Oh,
sorry. You're so observant. I haven't thought of that. Thank you.
Okay. We're making it difficult for each folks. All right, so I will go ahead and get started. As we said, so I am relatively new to the energy space. You've got folks on the stage here who've been doing this their entire career, so it's an absolute honor to get to be facilitating this discussion. And I'm going to start off by just asking each of you panelists to introduce yourselves, tell us about your company, your role at that company, and anything else that you'd like to share with the audience. So why don't we start there, Allie?
All right, great. Thanks, Yasmin. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm Allie DiTrio. I'm the Chief Strategist for Reimagine Power, and we are a boutique microgrid and clean tech consulting firm focused on policy, government regulatory affairs, and market strategy, mostly here in the West, but we do have operations in other states as well. So it's really a pleasure to be here and talk with you all. I've been in the energy industry for about 15 years, holding a variety of different positions in policy, business development, market research. And in 2019, decided to start Reimagine Power to really focus on the niche of microgrid policy and really evolving our energy markets and our clean energy infrastructure for the 21st century. So we have a team of 5, and really I focus on leading our diverse portfolio of clients and projects. And we have a small niche, and talking before, we're also a small family business, so I'm really proud of that my brother and sister both work for me, and we have some other team members as well that are basically like family to us. So it's been a really great honor and privilege to have a business and continue to work in San Francisco and beyond. So yeah, I think that's it for now.
Great.
Yeah, and I'm Kate Reimer. I have also been in energy and clean tech basically my whole career. Started out at PG&E, and then I've been at a series of startups since then doing utility scale batteries, behind the meter batteries, time response. And now I work at Reactive as its VP of technology, where we implement energy efficiency, HVAC, and solar solutions for large commercial and industrial clients. And I mean, in my spare time, I'm always trying to get outside and be outdoors, as I'm sure many people who are environmentalists are. And so I love going camping. I just got back from a camping trip last weekend with my son.
That's great. Good afternoon. I'm Robert Grant. I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs and Social Impact at Cruise. Cruise is an all-electric, self-driving company headquartered here in San Francisco. Hopefully you've seen our cars out in the road and had a pleasant experience with them. We're excited to be here. I want to thank Billy Riggs and the University of San Francisco for hosting this event. It's I think, the second or third time that we've been here as Cruise. We're just really excited about that. For me, a little of my history, worked in the federal government for a long time, has now been involved with startups and tech and policy world for the last 10 years. And what drew me to Cruise was the fact that we're all electric, we're renewable, this is all intentional on our part. All of our vehicles, future and present, are designed to be shared, and we're really aimed at trying to decarbonize our transportation system, help California reach its GHG goals. And then moving forward, as we scale, we really think we can have a large impact on not only how people move, hopefully move sustainably, but also on how charging rolls out in this city and otherwise, because that's one of our big challenges.
Cool.
Great. Hey everyone, my name's Peter Light, and station system, and I just saw this kind of underlies our lives, and yet there was this ability, this potential to go serve people energy in a ways that served their lives, but do so in a way that didn't impact our planet. And that was just the grand challenge I wanted to dedicate myself to. I was at a company called Bloom Energy that started out in a lab with NASA scientists, and is now it provides on-site clean energy generation to many large businesses. And later at Google X, where I co-founded a program that really went to model the whole power grid to say, how do you get to a deeply decarbonized grid? And there I started to see, wow, there are all these commercial buildings that could save money with on-site clean energy, and they're not doing it. So why is that? Went to talk to a bunch of building owners, and that led to what is now Lumen Energy, when I'm the co-founder and CEO. We're a young company growing here in San Francisco. And we are really out to make it super easy for commercial building owners to profitably decarbonize. So.
Great, thank you. And so before we dig in deeper, I want to take a minute and also take your pulse on where you stand on sort of climate pessimism and optimism. And the reason I ask is because, as I mentioned, I'm left big tech with this intention of really digging into climate and figuring out where I can have the most impact. And depending on, I find myself fluctuating between utter despair to deep optimism, depending on what I'm reading or who I'm talking to, and that fluctuation can happen within the span of an hour, depending. So I'm really curious, for those of you who've been, in this for such a long time and living and breathing this day in, day out, where would you say you are on that spectrum right now?
You want to start with me?
We can go off. Why don't we start with Peter?
I'm an optimist, and I will not understate that it is a massive challenge to move how we power our lives, and how we shift. If you look at the history of industrial transformations, there are things that happen, but they happen slowly. We're talking about shifting how we move people, how we live, and yet where I'm deeply optimistic, I think an author that I looked to that really captured it best, it was a guy named Ramez Nam. He put it in his book called The Infinite Resource. It's called The Power of Ideas on a Finite Planet. And I thought that really just captured that where resources are finite, but ideas are not. They're infinite. And I think our ability as a society and a community to compound the benefits that we get when we advance technologies and policies and ways of collaborating, that's what I see happening. And I've seen it happen now in the last 18 months. It is amazing to see the inrush of talent into this space, and all the companies here and beyond. So it's the inflow of talent and ideas and capital to support those ideas is just phenomenal. So that is something I'm very excited about.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah.
Yeah, for those that have had the chance to know me or just getting to know me, I'm an eternal optimist on nearly every issue. So, but on this one in particular, I do think, to Peter's point, the innovation, the creativity, the ability to solve solutions, even though there are challenges with that, I always place my bet on society and people to move in the right direction. It might be slow, may not be as fast as we want, but the arc of our story tends towards greater benefits and to addressing bigger issues. And so I really do think we're on that path. I think it's accelerating, to Peter's statement. And I'm thinking, we have somebody or two former panelists and this panelist who work with their families. They must be optimists, because I know my family, and I'm not sure I'd get into business with them. So I think there has to be some optimism from those folks.
I admire that. I feel as though we're probably not doing enough fast enough. And I have seen a lot of people join cleantech and leave cleantech. So that's really hard for me. I also have a 4-year-old son who's going to be really impacted by this. And it's really hard for me to imagine what that conversation is going to be like when it happens. Those things said, though, in the middle of the day in California, we're 75% or more renewables right now. Yay, yeah. California, woo! So that's awesome, and I love seeing all the vehicle electrification that's happening. It seems like I live in Berkeley; it's happening everywhere. Every new car is an EV. So those things are all really encouraging to me, and I would never want to work in another industry.
Yeah, I'd say I waver between healthy skepticism and optimism. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in jaded by the politics and feel like, there's a lot of different stakeholders that all want different things, and it's really hard to build consensus and move forward on, especially a lot of these bigger policy decisions. And so sometimes I do feel, a little bit of pessimism, but I think I really always come back to the optimism when I see just the youth and the new generations that are coming up and, graduating college at this time or that are in school. There's a lot more awareness, I feel like, in climate and sustainability than there ever was before. I was an ASU grad, went to the School of Sustainability and was one of the first to ever get an actual real degree in sustainability. And at the time, we were just, they were throwing things at the wall and seeing what stuck with, sustainability of economics and, urban planning and environment. Now they have a full school with multiple majors built out over the years, and so many other schools have followed, which is really great. So I think the education, the awareness has really come a long way, as well as the technology. So I remain really optimistic that our future generations are really going to help us solve these problems.
Yeah. Well, you guys are making me feel more optimistic, more hopeful, so I guess that's good. I think there's also the role, like you said, of just holding the accountability too, of making sure that we're eyes wide open on what needs to be done and how far away we are from that, where we're going. And on that note, I'd love to hear from each of you what your companies are doing and what the work that you're doing inside of your companies when we talk about what we can do and should be doing in this fight. What are you doing? What are your companies doing to pivot to clean energy? How are they thinking about climate? And I want to ask if it's enough. Yeah. Do you want to start, Peter?
Sure. So a couple thoughts. Something that I mean, let's also like look just the scale of the problem. I don't want to understate it. It is a massive, massive challenge, and also if you sort of look at the IPCC reports of just talk about, you know, this year it needs to be the last year of emissions this high. It needs to trend down radically by 2030. And you just look across the complexity of our energy and climate and carbon system. It's really hard. I think though, what's really exciting is that there are technologies that make sense, and I think these issues get more and more about deployment and business models, and I think that is there's a lot of talent outside of this room and outside of, call it like, the believer class. And I'll just give you a live example of that. Last night I was on a phone with the chief investment officer of a large real estate company who is saying, look, we want to green all of our buildings, and we're doing that to get all of our, we want to get the best tenants want this now. So that is, in my mind, those are forces that are very significant and move sort of way beyond. So I think to your question, like, what are we doing? I mean, that's maybe sort of gives you a hint that what we have found is that there are many buildings, commercial buildings, which could save money with on-site clean energy, and there are some that want to fully decarbonize. But the process to do that has been bewildering and complicated, and people don't do it. There's all kinds of challenging data issues. It's a complex undertaking to go figure it out. So we show up, we've designed software to remotely price and model buildings to give people an instant answer as to whether your building has potential. And then we guide people through the process, through a supplier marketplace to help them get the best value through the process. So, snapshot.
Great.
Yeah, so at Cruise, I mean, I think a couple of things that we're doing. One, we're challenging the industry to be all electric. And so last year, we worked with the Union of Concerned Scientists, labor unions, and others to pass a bill in Sacramento that requires all light-duty AVs to be EVs by 2030. This is 5 years ahead of where the Newsom administration had hoped all vehicle sales would be. So one, we're leading by example in the policy realm. Two, we're leading by example in kind of the infrastructure. So just down the San Francisco waterfront on Cesar Chavez Street, we plan to build one of the largest charging stations in all of North America. To Peter's point, even in San Francisco, there's a lot of hurdles and kind of unique things that you have to go through. So I think, just to put that in perspective, we've had to have 7 different agencies sign off on this infrastructure project. We've gotten 6 of them so far. And then that's just the beginning of the end of the beginning to move this project forward. But we are putting our money where our mouth is in terms of building that infrastructure. And then thirdly, how are we sourcing that electricity? Well, we have an innovative project that Billy has mentioned called Farm to Fleet, where we're sourcing all of our power from the Central Valley, buying RECs through the LCFS system from 2 family-owned farms in the Central Valley, Moonlight Farms and Sundale Farms. And so this is a way that we can actually tie tech and agriculture together here in California. We think it can be a national model for how rural and urban economies can meet, even though autonomy may or may not be front and center in a lot of rural areas. And then lastly, I would say, one of the things we're doing is trying to really be out in the community and advocate for use of sustainable transportation. So we have just signed a recent kind of early rider pilot with the University of San Francisco. And so the students here are the first in the world to really experience fully driverless rides in a all-electric all renewable autonomous vehicle. And they're giving us great feedback. So one of the things our early riders have told us is 81% say they will take into account whether their ride is zero emission or not. So that also kind of feeds my optimism.
Yeah.
So a lot going on our end. Can we do more? I always think we can do more. My team knows this. My people know this.
Yeah.
I challenge us to do more because there's more to be done.
Yeah, but I love that you're thinking about the model and thinking about how to scale those models, whether it be kind of urban, rural, that type of thing, or taking the model that you have and how do we supercharge that, right? And what are the opportunities to, and we'll talk a little bit about cross-sector later, but what are the opportunities to partner and collaborate to just take something that's working in one city, in one state, and awesome. Having Kate.
Yeah, well, and speaking of speed, at Redaptive, one of the really major selling points that we have for our customers is that we're going to give, these Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 clients with large portfolios of building a faster path to net zero, right? I mean, that's such an important part of what we're trying to achieve here. And so we've been really encouraged by the number of clients who've been coming to us lately because of, for instance, like the changes in the SEC carbon disclosure rules. These are all really fantastic policies that are coming into place to help us as an industry.
Do you want to talk real quick about this SEC disclosure and just give us for folks that aren't aware?
Sure. Just recently, there were some announcements that SEC will be requiring public companies to disclose the amount of carbon that they're emitting and to have targets for sort of, sustainability targets and goals. It's not necessarily maybe as aggressive as some really hardcore environmentalists would want it to be, in the sense that it could actually be mandating net zero, and we're not quite there yet, but we're certainly making progress, and that's really exciting. So yeah, I mean, some of the innovations that we would love to sort of bring to the market here are to really show that full path to net zero, bringing together energy efficiency, HVAC, solar technologies, all to sort of these really large, in some cases like retail banking, manufacturing, large C&I customers who've not necessarily made this their top priority historically, and making it a double bottom line issue. So I think speed is one of the things we're really trying to accomplish because we don't have that much time.
Awesome. Allie.
Yeah, so Reimagine Power is, as the name says, reimagining the power sector, and we work with a lot of different clients to help them achieve those goals and really looking at energy market evolution, I would say, for the 21st century, how we can, deploy more clean energy projects in a strategic manner, how we can modernize our electric grid for the future so we can have all of these autonomous vehicles, a lot more of the electric vehicle and, other distributed energy resources that people and companies are all starting to adopt and make sure that our grid is ready and able to handle that. So we do a lot of boots on the ground advocacy for our clients. And so we're in Sacramento, we're at the Public Utilities Commission, and we're really trying to bring that voice of, making sure that we're moving faster, but also doing it in a strategic manner. And so a lot of the things that we really focus on is, reimagining the power sector and provide, so that we have a diverse portfolio of clean energy solutions. And so I was really heartened to see the discussion earlier about bioenergy, because I think it's also a really important energy resource that's not talked about very much, but it provides the clean, firm power resources that we really need to complement all the solar production and other renewables that are intermittent, like wind, that have come to dominate our energy portfolio here in California, which is great. So we're also trying to advise our clients and help them, as they figure out what is our role in the 21st century power system. And so we do work with a lot of the startups and nonprofits that are looking at these issues very closely. So really excited about all that's happening in the future and just trying to help them navigate the policy and regulatory spaces. It can be very convoluted and difficult, especially when these companies are really just focusing on how do we innovate and how do we bring our products to market. So we really help them with navigating the policy space so that they can focus on innovating more for good.
So awesome. I think taking that thread of innovating and innovation in this space, I mean, there's a lot of technology that exists. There's a lot of tools that exist, whether it be microgrids, PPAs, direct response, EVs, and all the technology that's coming there. I'm curious, shifting to talking about specific technologies. First of all, I want to know. I want your thoughts on: are they the right ones? Do we have the right technologies? And secondly, what technologies do you feel will be the most impactful as we look at the issues in front of us and moving to net zero. So let's start with you, Peter.
Sure. There's if there's a specific channel to me, I think what's going to happen over time is there are going to be things. Well, like it used to be natural gas, like you can't get rid of it in a building. That's just unimaginable for a heat. And then people are like, well, wait, like what? Like there's a heat pump, and this has been tried a few times, and then now those are kind of rolling out, and then there are cities that are saying you can't use gas anymore. So those things are there's the cascade of new technologies that are coming. There's also tremendous innovation in storage technologies. You might think of batteries in a car just as one, but there's all sorts of other long duration non-lithium ion technologies. So that sort of I call just sort of vast speciation of technologies is happening behind the scenes, which is really cool to see. And then there are a variety of companies which are going to help people just sort of get them to market. The one other thing I'll say, like, do we have what we need? And this kind of brings it full circle. Just yesterday, a friend of mine runs a company that is making a novel carbon-free cement. They just raised a $55 million Series A. Through one investor was Bill Gates's Breakthrough Energy Ventures. I just highlight that a novel cement technology for most of the last 15 or 20 years, I don't think you could. That would be just like, good luck, kids. Enjoy your science project. Now those things are getting massive funding, and that's really great to see. So there's a whole spectrum of kind of the TRL, if you will, or technology readiness, are things that are still very much in the lab, but there's a lot more that's happening. And so, long answer, yes, we have the technology in various stages, but there's still a lot to go change and make happen.
And I'm hearing you speak to innovation and deployment.
Transportation person, so I'll stay in my realm. They'll choose that option if it's available to them. And what we're trying to do at Cruise is say, hey, you don't even have to buy an electric vehicle, right? You don't have to find a place to charge it. You don't have to worry about those concerns. We'll take that on, that's our burden, and we'll make something available to you that's convenient, that's easy to use. Mm-hmm. You do that for most people, I think it's easy for them to make that choice then, to be more sustainable, to think about climate in a way that's convenient, but you have to make it easy for them. Mm-hmm. Like with the cement. If there's an available substitute that's not extraordinarily expensive, I imagine people are going to eat that up, right? But getting to scale is kind of the hardest thing here. And then getting people to realize that this is convenient and can be part of their everyday life, and we're not asking them to become an environmental activist to help save the environment, they'll make those choices.
Yeah, and you're seeing the inflow of capital to help get to scale. Yep. And then we'll talk next about policy and existing structures and where we are there, but that is heartening, and that's great to hear. Kate?
Yeah, I mean, so one gap that we see in sort of the innovation space is going to sound probably pretty boring. I'll start out with that. It's a good intro, I know. But no, what we've seen is a lot of customers, including like REITs and other sort of like landlords, who actually cannot get access to bills. Just plain basic information that would go into these SEC type disclosures that say, this is how much energy we're consuming. They just don't even have access to that basic information across their entire fleet. It's actually remarkably difficult to gather. And we, for instance, have developed a meter that we ship out and install at facilities to ensure that we can actually gather this information more reliably. Turns out that's easier than going to the utility companies. So I mean, there is sort of this really interesting space for innovation, even in just gathering data and sort of the back end stuff that seems like it should probably already be in place. Big shout out to Utility API, because they've also been working on this problem for a long time, and they've made a lot of progress, especially across the solar states. But there's 3,000 utilities across this country. So it's a pretty daunting challenge if you're really trying to hit a whole portfolio like we are, and something that we've been thinking deeply about. It's kind of a different form of innovation. Yeah.
I think one thing that I think about with technology is how we can have it achieve multiple goals. And one technology that I really work a lot on, but I think is really cool, is microgrids, which are a combination of many different technologies, both generating and storage resources, and they're interconnected to form through a discrete geographic area, and they have the ability to island or disconnect from the utility grid and operate autonomously. And microgrids can serve a variety of different roles. They're not just for backup power, though that's a chief one. And as we've seen in California in particular, we've had lots of wildfires and blackouts and other, natural disasters or extreme weather that really strain the grid and either can result in people getting blacked out for several days or maybe even a week at a time in some of the rural areas, or even just having poor power quality, which for a lot of these high-tech applications really rely on, very reliable source of energy is needed. So I think that there's a way of really investing in the technologies that are going to solve multiple problems. And so with microgrids, they can also provide a tool, I think, for communities to both save energy, save money on their utility bills, and optimize their energy needs, but also in times of need would actually be able to keep that power running during times of disruption otherwise, which is a really great thing for the communities, especially with critical facilities and other public agencies that have, life or death operations that need to keep running. So I think those are really important to keep investing in. And so if we can think about the technologies from serving multiple purposes and really help on, provide a truly sustainable solution, I think that's a really important thing to consider for the technology as it keeps evolving over time.
So let's stick with that as we think about microgrid technology. So we're talking about the technology. In general, there's a lot of technology, right? And more coming that we need. I'm curious your thoughts, particularly because you're focusing in policy, your boots on the ground. So structurally, what are the changes that we need to see, right? In terms of policy adoption, policy changes, our economic, what are the barriers to getting some of these technologies deployed at scale, right? And that's really what's going to make an impact and move the needle. So curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say one of the biggest challenges for microgrids, and I would say this also comes down to, distributed energy resources of all sizes, as we have a legacy utility business model where, we built our grid, in the 20th century, even some in the 19th century, based on the fact that we were having large, centralized power sources, transmitting power over long distance transmission lines to the end use customer, who is really a passive customer. They pay their bills, they expect their lights to come on, and that's about the extent of that exchange. Now, as we're coming into the 21st century, we have a lot of customers that are demanding more innovative technological solutions. They want to take control of their own energy needs. And I think they're really being stymied by this kind of legacy business model that has persisted from the 20th century. And a lot of our policies and regulations really have not caught up to where the technology is, or I think really reacting to the sense of urgency with climate change and moving faster because we really need to. Our regulators tend to be very risk averse, and so they are naturally hesitant to want to invest in new technologies or let other companies and other market actors kind of enter the space and provide these innovative solutions. So I think there's a real challenge with our legacy utility business model and how we invest in the grid and who should be allowed to invest in the grid. So I think some of the changes we need to make are letting more customers and communities form their own energy microgrid, like a community level microgrid, and make sure that they're allowed to do that so long as they're meeting, safety and reliability metrics, which are key, and make sure that everyone is protected in the public. So I think that's one critical piece of the puzzle. And also providing monetization pathways for things like microgrids to provide grid services, demand response, and other, I would say, things that help the grid in general during blue sky conditions. So we're not just investing in these assets for an emergency or black sky conditions, but they can provide value back to the grid and utilities in normal operations. So I think that's really important. That allows us to really, I would say, monetize resiliency. So we have, these projects, these assets are providing benefits all the time. And then when we really need them for the emergencies, they're also there, but we didn't have to invest in something just for an emergency.
That Kate.
In terms of structural things, I was referring earlier to, I'm still sort of in awe, frankly, that the SEC is interested in our greenhouse gas emissions. I love that. I think that's a really great thing that's happening. But I do think that there are policies that could be, brought down from the federal level that would make a lot of impact. I am really encouraged by the amount of private entities that are moving sort of behind the meter on their own independently. And so I would say that there really has been this sweep of social movements that that basically bring people and bring customers to a point where they really care about sustainability from the products that they're choosing, right? Sort of voting with your dollars, if you will, buying sustainable cheese. And so I am encouraged by sort of all the movement that's happening on the private side, independent of those regulatory efforts. Yeah.
Yeah, you're in awe of the SEC. I'm still in awe of the robot milkers. I have to see this. This is really cool stuff. For me, I think, you guys have touched upon two other things. So something different I think about is land use policy and tax policy. I think these are the types of policies that seem really banal and boring, but really can make markets shift consumer decisions, shift investment decisions, and can really play a very helpful role in getting everyday people to move towards a more sustainable future. And so one of the things that we talk about at Cruise a lot is that there is not a conflict between added density and the housing issue and electrification. And so that's where this issue of like land use policy comes together. Where can you put charging stations? How can you integrate maybe private charging and public charging together as you look towards increasing value for the land use over time, particularly as the world gets more populated, cities get more dense. So I think they seem kind of boring, but they play a very important role in getting government to have that hand that pushes people in the right direction.
And are you engaging directly with those entities?
So we do. We engage at the local, state, federal, international level on all of those issues. And so I really think, though, it starts with that old phrase of, act locally, think globally. And so what we try to do is make San Francisco kind of our initial efforts here, and then see where we can scale out from there.
Back to model, kind of model.
Because if anyone's worked in the policy world, San Francisco is a really good, hard place to learn how to solve complex problems.
Excellent.
Well, I'll just say I've been curious sitting here thinking about what those 7 different groups you had to get approvals for. I mean, those are the kind of things like that. That's a light bulb for where there's a potential for innovation. And I think maybe to the broader comment about just sort of expanding our definition of technology. I mean, Kate hinted at this, and we both live and breathe this space. We sort of tend to think of like there's some catalyst breakthrough or something that was invented in a lab, but like in the world of decarbonizing buildings, it's the things like the critical energy data is locked up in PDFs that are in super antiquated systems, and people just can't get the information. So those kind of things, there's a one strike of the pen, which is just mandate that utility data be available from buildings, that, with privacy concerns, but all that. But they're kind of things like that are that would be very catalytic.
Yeah, and those are the pieces that unlock the next thing, right? It's the barriers, right? And you're going, okay, if we can make that mandated, then what are all the other possibilities? And back to like innovation or deployment, well, these new structures, it's innovative, right? We need to think differently about data in a context of an entirely different grid, right? And a different reality that we're living in today. So I've just been told we only have a few minutes left, and I have 2 questions for all of you that I want to hear. So I'm going to ask both questions and give you guys a chance to answer both at the same time. So one is, you guys have been in this space for a really long time, and as leaders in this space, in the energy space, I'd love to hear your advice for individuals, for organizations, for the industry at large. How do we need to be thinking as leaders, every single one of us, everybody in the room, all of us on stage, to unlock all these pieces, to think innovatively, to make an impact here on this incredibly difficult problem before us? So that's one. And then we're talking about energy and microgrids, and we're talking kind of at a higher level. I'm curious, again, as someone who's newer to this space, it can be frustrating how much talking there is, and I'm curious about what is it that we can be doing, every single one of us right now, to be making a difference here and to start to move the needle, and to move the needle faster. So love to get all of your thoughts on both questions. Rob, do you want to start?
Sure. Wow, those are big questions.
And you only have a few minutes.
Right, exactly. So, I think my advice to people would be take action. Don't be afraid to move forward with big ideas, and to not necessarily, gird for a fight with the establishment, but be prepared to challenge norms, right? We're doing this a little bit in the autonomous vehicle industry with all electric vehicles and how we want to get around. We're trying to get people to think differently about how they look at their transportation options and what are the rules that go around those new choices. And it requires some outside the box thinking. And so I would always say, don't be afraid to challenge kind of norms and assumptions. I say this to my 16-year-old all the time. My wife thinks I'm crazy. She's like, he needs to be following the rules. I'm like, well, this is the time to challenge the rules.
Yeah.
And so I would say, to everybody, kind of do that in ways that you can, big or small. And then, secondly, how can we each make a difference every day? It's going to sound kind of weird, and maybe I've been in California too long, but I think it starts with being kind and being open to others and others' thoughts. I think the way you change people's minds and habits is through that connection. I think we can try to have government come down and dictate what we should all do, but I think the most influential people in most people's lives are their friends, their families, their people they work with. And to the extent that we can be open and share and push gently on kind of moving towards a more sustainable future, I think that's the biggest impact.
Yeah, and that collective awareness by just being here today and having this discussion. Perfect, thanks. Peter?
Sure. Wow. Just bottle up what Rob said. That's very well spoken, and I share the feeling and sentiment. I'd say, just beginning where we are. There's so much to be done. There's something for everyone to contribute, just right where you are now. And I think that's applying yourself in these areas. If it calls to you and it's your passion and curiosity. I think to come back to your first question, I mean, it's something that I always ask myself. Is really just kind of what ceiling am I setting accidentally? And a little story that I'll share with you all that I love is, and it's inspirational for me, is in Yosemite, El Capitan, 3,000-foot rock face. For most of human history, that was looked at as just this beautiful, glorious, but unbelievably big mountain. And then in 1958, this guy named Oren Harari ends up climbing it over 45 days and a year and a half of journey and rope and whiskey, and it was like this amazing feat. And then people were like, oh, that's possible. And then they said, maybe we can do it, in a little bit less time. And by the 90s, someone did it in a day. By 2017, a guy named Alex Honnold climbed it in a few hours with no ropes.
No ropes, yeah.
And there's no technology in that whole story. That was, it's possible. So that compounding of what's possible keeps happening, and I think that's what is super exciting to me. And I just ask myself, again, where's there the glass ceiling that I might be creating ourselves?
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you.
And my answer is probably pretty quick. As a leader, the thing that I feel myself repeating all the time is how do we break down these silos? And I think that applies within companies. It also applies in industry and between policy and different groups as well. But the more we can break down silos, the better. And it's especially hard in Zoom land, right? When we're all remote and we're constantly trying to connect through this little portal that we view the world through, it just becomes harder. And so it has to become more intentional. Communication is an intentional and very tactical thing sometimes. And so we need to just keep pushing to connect and to make sure that we're all kind of communicating and making sure that we're working together to solve this challenge. No one should be trying to face this alone.
Agreed. As a leader, I'm always thinking about how do I build alliances with others and really trying to keep an open mind throughout the whole process and not box out any solutions, but really, keep all options on the table, but, really try to empathize with others and understand their position, where they're coming from, try to communicate in an honest and intentional way, while again, still, fighting for what we believe in, what we really need to do to solve a lot of these problems. So I think it's a delicate balance, but I'm always thinking about how do I build alliances. And I would also say, paying it forward. I really think it's critically important that we help and bring up the generations behind us. And, when you think about how you're early on in your career and all the mentors and leaders that may have helped you, I really always try to think about how I can help the future generations as well. So I'm always open to talking with college students. I'll always make time for people. I like hiring younger people so that we can all help bring them up together. And so I think it's really crucially important that we pay it forward as well. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, sort of the empathy, communication, kindness, challenging ourselves. I think all really, really, really great advice. And I'm honored to have learned so much from all of you today. It's, if we think about the energy transformation that is ahead of us, it's huge. You guys have been working on it for a really long time. Super grateful on behalf of everyone here. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think, again, just being here in community, grappling with these issues, I know we're making a difference. I know that we're moving forward. And I just want to see us do more and more. So thank you. Thank you for very thoughtful answers to all the questions.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. So we're going to do a little transition here. So thank you all again. We have some gifts for you, and they're in the back. And, don't spend it all in one place. So, but thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. It was such an amazing panel. And I think it really sets us up for what you've seen some of the folks entering online. So let's give this panel a round of applause again. And so we'll transition to our next segment. We have an interesting discussion with an entrepreneur, a 12-year-old sea advocate, as well as the CEO for Aquarium of the Bay. So, but before we do that, I just wanted to highlight we are running this interactive poll. You can see here on both sides of the screen, a lot of you have actually already been participating. It looks like some of you had been voting early and often, which is okay in this format. But you can see here that a lot of folks are really talking about ESG. We could probably unpack what that meant. A lot of things that I think we're going to continue to talk about in this next panel, but also when we get into talking about some finance and structures in our panel and our penultimate panel, about kind of how we can think about the new ways to think about money and finance and structures to address climate and sustainability in an innovative way. So without further ado, I want to welcome first to stage alumni of University of San Francisco, John Fisher, CEO of CrowdOptic, as well as VC NFT, and his daughter, Avery Fisher, sea advocate, 12-year-old extraordinaire, came today after school. Of course, my boys are back in the back. They came to watch you and cheer you on, want to hear about everything new. So you come on up. And then also we're really delighted to be joined. Oh, we can do the fist bump.
Fist bump.
We can do the fist bump. Yeah, so okay. George Jacob from Aquarium of the Bay. Thank you so much for being here, George. I really appreciate it. Maybe we can just sit down and talk about what you all have been up to for the last 2 years, John, Avery. I mean, that's a good way to start our discussion this afternoon.
Last 2 years. Yeah, it's been crazy.
I got the pleasure of meeting John a few months ago, and I just met Avery today, and it was interesting to hear about what you did when the pandemic happened to all of us.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and maybe, if you wouldn't mind, John, maybe introduce yourself, and Avery, if you want to introduce yourself as well to start off here.
Go ahead, sweetheart.
I'm Avery Fisher. I'm 12 years old, and during the lockdown, I became a scuba diver. To this day, I am the youngest scuba diver for Scuba Magic, and I also am a volunteer at the Aquarium of the Bay, and I help take care of animals and just witness the environment and stand up for the ocean and help people follow their passions involving the ocean.
Cool. George.
Good, George. We underwent probably the worst period in our 26-year history at the aquarium with the shutdown. We lost We are a team of 200 people. We lost half our staff in the first 1 week of shutdown. And we had 24,000 animals to feed and no revenue streams coming in. And 3 people who stepped up. One would be John. And there was a young boy from Spokane who stepped up with all his pocket money and had this rallying cry that raised over $100,000 for the aquarium. And young Avery here with her dad, they actually made a significant difference to how the aquarium approaches NFT-based auctions.
All right, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves there, George. Why don't you just tell us, we'll scratch the surface on what you do, which is, it sounds like a lot. But John, why don't you tell us kind of what, your background and how you ended up in this situation in the pandemic, diving with your daughter.
Yeah, I'm an inventor, an entrepreneur. NASA released a study a year before the pandemic hit, and they said that 20 million Empire State buildings worth of ice broke off from Greenland and fell into the ocean in the 20th century. And that this process is a third of everything responsible, causing planet Earth to literally wobble on its axis as it spins in orbit. So we human beings are literally shaking the Earth, right? And you feel that sometimes. You feel that on the way here, traffic, how loud it is, and everything else. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic struck, and there is no traffic, and everything's quiet, except the ocean, at least in our lives. And it really called to us in a different way. And we decided to spend the pandemic in it. And Avery, age 10, learned to scuba dive, which is the minimum age that you're able to do that. But by age 11, she was accomplishing things that in that industry had not been accomplished at that age. I mean, we just tore into this. What an opportunity. And then we couldn't get Avery to warm water to meet all the creatures that she deserved to meet. We couldn't get on the airplanes. So George opened up his aquarium and let us volunteer in all the tanks. And we were feeding the sharks and waving to them and the rays and the this and the that. And it was fantastic. And then George and I connected on a commercial opportunity, which we'll talk about as well. So it's a straight line from the humanitarian piece to the nonprofit piece and also the synergy between companies. So the pandemic was pretty special for us in that way.
Maybe we can put Avery on the spot, because I think there on the live stream there may be a bunch of young people watching, and I know there are at least 2. There's a 9 and 11-year-old in the back that really are impressed with you, and they want to hear your story. But how? I know your dad is really good at this, but how did you come about doing this? How did you decide to do this, and where did that idea come from?
So we are the adventure type. We like to explore things that a lot of people don't because they just think it's not cool. And in my school life, I always sort of like to do Tinker Lab, or I like to experiment and do things where I can create and inspire others to create things for their own and make opportunities. And ever since I was little, I wanted to become a marine biologist, and we would always go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And by the time I was 6, it was my first time in the tide pool. That was the first time ever wearing a scuba tank, and at the time it was freezing and the water was cold, so I didn't really enjoy it that much. But then 1 week into the lockdown, my dad came into my room, and he's like, "What are we gonna do?" He's like, "We're not just gonna sit in bed all day." And that's when both, at almost the same time, we said scuba. And from there, we found Marin Diving Center. We got connections, and we started to launch into the scuba certifications. And it's just been a great journey from there.
All right, can I follow up with one more? Yeah. So, I mean, it must be hard. I don't know. I don't do it that much. So I mean, you have to get up early, right? You have to get up early, or you have what makes it hard to get, or easier to get in cold water? I mean, how do you get the gumption or the grit to do that?
It's just so thrilling being underwater. It's being in a different universe, and that in itself is just such a great experience that the temperature or the conditions don't really matter. And I think just being able to do something hard for the reward is the part that makes me wake up early or go in the water despite the weather.
I know. Well, I mean, John, you manage a lot of people. I mean, like, how do you train grit into kids?
So we need a DNA test. I mean, her mother is fantastic, but I don't know where she gets it. We try our best, but she's an operator.
Well, tenacious. Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of where the idea to kind of do something with the aquarium by the bay came from, and a little bit about, John, kind of your entrepreneurial side and kind of what ended up happening as a result of kind of this emerging partnership with Aquarium by the Bay.
Well, I want to turn it over to George as well, but these guys, as George mentioned, were under siege, and so were a lot of people that you're talking with today, and so we really architected a partnership. George's budget in some of these departments that are responsible for teaching the next generation about the oceans are leaving something to be desired, and we took a look at these things and said, how can we raise money and how can we help? And one idea we had is the first few times that we were diving, you meet in George's aquarium, this is San Francisco Aquarium by the Bay. If you've been there, it's a 250-pound sea bass, and it just comes at you. And we thought, well, let's launch a project. NFTs are something we're involved in a company, and let's launch a project where someone could bid to name the giant sea bass in the aquarium and de facto adopt the creature. And we did that, and we raised, $15,000 right away from a bidder who renamed it General Zod, which is hasn't taken root yet, but I wave and sort of trying to get him to adopt it. And these things live for 75 years, so embedded in the NFT is also pictures of the darling creature every year or so in perpetuity. So it's a great asset.
Well, before, I think, George, we want to show some pictures of this, but before we do, maybe we could just explain this amorphous concept of NFT and what is that? Because I don't think all of our audience really has a full understanding of that just yet.
Yeah, so NFTs are assets that live at the smart contract level. I was running a deal during the .com days, and don't be fooled, the reporters who are out today saying that NFTs are a joke and they're just JPEGs. They did the same thing when they talked about eBay, the same way back when. And you don't want to get pulled into that. The young people have these fantastic opportunities, and you don't want to push them away from, I think, the biggest point of growth and explosion that we've ever seen. So an NFT is an asset that lives at the smart contract level, and anything commoditizable, anything auctionable, anything that you want to put up there, it can be managed and live and breathe and change. It can be subject to rules and algorithms, and that's the smart contract. And then it can also be subject to pricing that you can see historically. So you can see all the different prices that a house sold for, but you can't see all the different prices of a trading card necessarily online or pieces of art or anything else. So it's this fantastic thing, and whether it's a derivative of crypto or whether crypto is a derivative of NFTs remains to be seen, but it's explosive. And the communities that are establishing, including the one that we're building with the aquarium. It's not just adopting a fish, but it is a series of NFTs so that you can participate as a bona fide member of the aquarium this way, and you get special access control and thereabouts.
Well, I want to just ground to, John, that you said one thing that at the end that it's about making community, and community, the term NFT means non-fungible token, and these tokens also, they represent something that is another term in this space, this idea of distributed organizations, or distributed, and we call them sometimes distributed autonomous organizations. And so what you're doing is you're saying, we don't have to think about necessarily just San Francisco being a part of our aquarium here. We can think about this network being larger. And so I think that's a really interesting thing you're onto there, is that supporting this ecosystem, and maybe even if we grow this more, supporting the planet, is a distributed function, and therefore can be supported by these new distributed tools that our young people are inventing through blockchain. So, and George, you want to talk to us a little bit about the practicalities of what that looks like at or what Avery's experience looked like at the aquarium?
I was actually out of the country a couple of times when she dived, but the pictures and the reaction of our staff and it was pretty phenomenal. And I actually saw a bunch of pictures this morning as well. It was pretty fantastic. And not just the dive portion of it, not just the auction portion of it, but also that she was performing magic tricks in our tanks. And, this has probably never been done at any aquarium, so thank you for doing that. She's probably the first one in the US to have performed magic tricks underwater inside an aquarium tank. And our tanks are, we have 2 tunnels at the aquarium. They hold 750,000 gallons of salt water. So they're pretty heavy-duty tanks. And so thank you for energizing the tanks and sharing the magic.
Yeah, I think we maybe we could toggle to see those. I think we have some pictures of some magic. Maybe tell us a little bit about Avery. What's the deal with underwater magic? That's a thing?
Yes, it is. It's a great experience. My instructor, Chef Anton, first you have to go in the pool and learn several tricks.
Wait, is he really a chef?
Yes, he is one of many things. He's a pretty crazy guy.
You have to have dinner with this guy. He's just incredible. Magic tricks at the table and everything. Yeah.
So this is my family here. One of the things is it's maintaining an audience. It's making people's experiences more memorable, which was one of the reasons I got hooked on this, because the fact that a young kid can walk through the tunnel and remember me doing a scuba magic trick for them is something I would like to make them think about and show them that even though how silly that might look, it's so great to look into a tunnel and see people smiling and be like, hey, you come here and I can show you something great. And I think that's a message that, if it's the only message I can get through to people, that doing anything, even though how silly it might look or even stupid at some point, it's just great. And it shows that sometimes doing different things lead to making very memorable experiences for young people.
So what are you doing in this photo right here? Is this a specific trick?
Yeah, so that's a trick where I make that ribbon come up from my hand and it just disappears, but it's it just comes out of my hand. And
if you're not swallowing a sword underwater, I'm
yeah.
underwhelmed.
Yeah.
He didn't mean that.
Sorry, Dad. No, flamethrowing is really one of.
Yes. In Avery's quick defense, there's a current in the tank. George mentioned the salt water, the density. Her buoyancy has to be near perfect so that she can hang there. And then doing these tricks, it was just unreal.
Wow.
I was just in there watching, and I was fatigued. I asked how much longer, 10 minutes before it was ready to go.
You must have learned so much, Avery.
Yeah, mostly it's learning how to multitask. That was a huge, you have to learn. It's being able to manage an audience and showing people how to do things that are never done before. That was something that was a little nerve-wracking the first time, is, I'm the youngest person to do this, and, making sure that showing with younger people that it's possible. Obviously didn't want to mess up, because that wouldn't have been such a great message, but having great instructors and people who are willing to teach you and help you become something that can inspire others was something very valuable I learned from this. And I hope that from other younger people who, even when I was doing my pool certification, a 10-year-old came up to me and said, oh, how do you do that? And I just taught him a trick. And that's something that's really special, is being able to teach people, even though I'm only 2 years older than them, how to do something that could change a person's life.
And it sounds like, when after the magic or before the magic was when this idea happened to help support financially through the non-fungible token or the NFT sale with George's operation?
Yeah, we've raised about 50,000 to date, and we're forecasting hundreds of thousands. It has to get going. The community has to take root. But it's really one of those examples. I mean, look at our daughter's experience, our family's experience that led to this synergy between one business and a nonprofit. And so as you're exploring development and as you're exploring what to do these days as the world presumably opens up and things get a little bit back to normal, that these partnerships, Innovating for Good, are possible. Because I've not sourced more fulfillment either professionally or personally than through this partnership. And we've been around, but this was very special, and it's ongoing. And if it can really help not just this aquarium, but others and museums and all kinds of folks, we think that's something to consider.
Well, I think we might have a photo of the thing that you did to share with everyone. I think I think there's a photo of the NFT at some point. But one thing I want to remind folks, if you have questions for Avery or for George or John, we do have question cards to fill those out, and we can entertain those. But when we think about the future, of where this is going, George, it's interesting that so you have this partnership. You've been able to sustain your operations, but where does it go, really?
So the auction part, I think we've just scratched the surface, if you will. There is tremendous potential in expanding it to different realms, not just the species that we hold, but ocean-based art, STEM education, STEAM education. The possibilities are endless. Where the aquarium is going is we are in the process of transforming the aquarium into a climate and ocean conservation living museum. So this is a $260 million project that we are working on right now on the Embarcadero. In addition to that, we are also designing climate centers in Norway and in Jamaica. And I think there are a couple of visuals of that. But as far as the NFT goes, the sky's the limit. And it's an untapped sector where the nonprofits, such as the Aquarium of the Bay, there are more than 200 accredited aquariums in the United States and zoos that can tremendously benefit from what we have accomplished here in San Francisco as a pioneer organization. And thanks to John, the possibilities, as I said, endless.
Well, I think we see, for those of us in the audience, and hopefully you online can see some of the vision that you have on the screen for what we can have here potentially in San Francisco.
Right. So the aquarium is right under the bigger canopy that you see there. And then there's a research lab, a floating research lab, which is a smaller bubble. And then there's an AI-driven device, which is the smallest bubble that you see in the middle.
Wow. Okay. So we talked before about AI milking robots, and now we're looking at research vehicles. And did you guys see that? The milking robot, that was pretty awesome, right? But okay. So can I just pretend that I'm a total neophyte and tell me, okay, I don't own any NFTs and I don't understand this idea of an auction. John, what are the mechanics of that? If I want to go and buy an NFT, and how does that actually work with your company, with VC NFT, and how does it actually work with supporting George?
So an NFT you can buy in a variety of different ways, and there are platforms, there are pursuits to do that. I know that crypto is a little annoying, and you have to authenticate yourself and getting used to it. But I'm talking to George right now. It's not a formal announcement, but we're talking about it using crypto to feed his fish. And you can adopt them that way, and then they can grow that way, and they can morph into different creatures that way. So the gamification, if you will, and getting younger and younger people interested in this stuff is very powerful. But an NFT is something that you can package yourself quickly and sell, or you can buy quickly. You keep it in an electronic wallet. And what it's done with this partnership is enabled the aquarium, just like a major restaurant that we'll announce soon, just like major museums or anything else, to right itself, to equalize that wobble.
A new revenue source.
A new revenue source, yeah. And it's really cool. And you, doing all these exciting things, have been the catalyst to a major business partnership as well. So the efficacy of what a young person can do that brought us all together is also innovating for good.
I think that's incredible. And so I can just go to this VC NFT site and I can do a lot of good, and I can actually support, we can support our museums, our social institutions, our environmental advocacy groups. And so did you ever think that you would have this much impact just by going diving?
Not really, but I feel as I kept going along and people coming up to me and being like, oh, that's so great, I didn't even know that existed, that's just made me keep going, that the fact that so many people didn't even know about this, and that with the resources that people have given me to continue doing what I'm doing, I think it's just really great to see where I've gone today and where I'll keep going.
We have a limited amount of time, so I'm going to give John the final word, because we've been handing out John's book to folks today, and there's something that really resonates with me about John's book, is that John really focuses on his family, who many of whom are here today, and it's really interesting the way that you have prioritized your family, not only through the pandemic, but through this incredible partnership. And so I wanted to ask you, you've scaled a lot of companies, and you seem to be very grounded in the values of connecting with people you love and things you love. And so do you have any advice for the young leaders, the aspiring executives that are in this room to carry forward from this experience and your experience in running multiple businesses?
Yeah, marry the right person is what I say to all of the students and employees and everything else. They don't teach you that. I just went back to my high school and college and everything else, and just tell us that. That's all we need. You don't need all the. My wife is here. She was in one of the images where she's looking at Darla. She was looking at Avery through the glass. She's been with us every step of the way in this whole process. This is walking down sandy beaches in Monterey with all the gear and helping us and making sure that Avery stays alive. It's not easy for your significant other to watch as you're 40 feet under the ocean and 1,000 meters away. But if you can be engaged in commerce, and this is a literal manifestation of it. It's easy to talk that way. If you can be engaged in commerce, but put your family first, which is literally the manifestation of this exercise, that's a key ingredient. And before all you young people rush out and say, well, I want to be bigger than what you're describing and I want to take over the world, there are real costs and there's real, intangibles associated with that. So all the guys that have just crushed the ball and are world famous, they owe it to come up here as well and talk about how it really happened and how much luck has to do with that and everything else. So if you're going to be subject to that, you might as well be subjected to the what's most important in the world. And to us, that's our team right there.
All right. Final word, George? Final word, Avery?
Yeah, before we leave the stage, we have 3 things for Avery.
Anyone else?
That's crazy.
We have a citation for you here from the Aquarium of the Bay.
That's crazy.
To the youngest scuba magician inside an aquarium.
Wow.
The second one is coming to you from Germany. It's not here yet. And it's a shark that is painted by a lot of activists and those who believe in their welfare and habitat. So it's on its way. The third one, this is not a crypto loot. It's it's what I call a good luck charm.
Oh.
It's an octopus.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Made by a local artist. So thank you for all you do. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you, everybody. One more thing before John leaves. If we could toggle over to that other presentation. The story doesn't end here. Actually, John's working on a fundraiser with us on the campus, and VC NFT is actually helping us create our own community, and his company is actually helping us sell NFTs for my book, which actually go to support the School of Management. So thank you, John, for that. We really appreciate your partnership. Avery,
Thank you.
you're
so
amazing.
much.
Very
Thank
impressive.
you.
So let's give these folks a hand. So we're going to take a short break and reset the stage, but don't go anywhere because this next panel is awesome. So please stick around 8 minutes and be back in your seats.
That's beautiful, Juicy. Thank you.
we green light? We're green light. All right. Welcome back. Before we have our next panelists up, I want to introduce Vipul Vyas, who's a faculty colleague of mine. Come on up here, Vipul. Vipul is a friend for long years. Our sons went to elementary school together, and you're going to sit right over here, Vipul. Vipul and I have actually been working here at University of San Francisco on something that tears off something that John talked about, which is this idea of using non-fungible tokens. Yes, you probably don't know what they are yet, but using blockchain to figure out how we do real stuff. And I think that's what you're going to see some of these people talking about is doing real stuff, but doing real stuff with finances. And so interestingly, we've been having this idea of how do we enable organizations to deliver services in distributed ways. So using distributed organizations to deliver financial and climate solutions. And why I want to set that up is because we're doing a lot of innovative stuff here at University of San Francisco that underlies a lot of the stuff that you're going to hear about from these panelists. And so, interestingly, and Vipul can maybe reference this a little bit, is that we have a pilot project where we're using distributed networks in a large city that happens to be maybe across the bay, it's in Oakland actually, to plant 2,000 trees, and we're doing it using citizen labor, and we're actually doing it through incentives and using a blockchain-based process to archive those and provide valid results. And so, here's a little graphic of that, and I like to say that every one of these people you're going to hear from today are all about building community and economic value and doing it in a way that actually is climate positive. And Ravi, if I got that wrong, you can chastise me later, but Ravi, Alex, my whole rest of you people, welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
It's like 6 people. I can't. So, come up. I'm so excited about this conversation. We're going to talk a lot about finance and structures. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Vipul, who can introduce this illustrious group from across the country, actually.
I've had a pleasure to get to meet some of you folks in the backstage, but I'll actually let you guys introduce yourselves. This is sort of a therapy session for me, so you guys are my therapist tonight around climate change. And I'm probably the least impressive person up here, so I'll let you guys start wowing the crowd. And we understand we're probably the last thing between folks and drinks, so we'll try to make this thing exciting.
All right, I guess I'm starting off. Hi, everyone. Ravi Mikkelsen, one of the co-founders of Atmos Financial. I've been in the climate and clean energy space for 22 years come this August. Engineer by training, switched over to finance because I saw the need for greater deployment of capital for this transition. Specifically, Atmos Financial is looking to leverage the $170 trillion of bank deposits, that's our money, around the world for this transition, because we don't get a say in what the banks directly fund with our money, but by choosing where we bank, we do have a say. And so Atmos Financial funds only climate positive projects like clean energy, electrification, regenerative agriculture, and we pay you more for that. So we call it no sacrifice banking.
Hi, I'm Alex Wright-Gladstein. I'm the founder and CEO of Sphere. And my background is also I've spent my whole career in climate, and I started my first company, it's called IR Labs, spinning a technology out of MIT that makes data centers and supercomputers more energy efficient by using light to move data between chips. And when running that company, when we started offering a 401k retirement plan to our employees, I asked for a climate-friendly option in the lineup, thinking it was a simple request. It ended up taking over 3 years to get a single climate-friendly option for our employees to invest in. I was shocked by how long it took, how hard it was, and that started me talking to a lot of people in the 401k industry to try to figure out why that was. Ended up realizing there are some real reasons for it, but none of them are insurmountable. It just seemed like no one had tried to make it easy before to offer climate-friendly options to employees, and so I realized I should probably work on that next. So that's why I founded Sphere, and we're making it easy for employers to offer climate-friendly options to their employees.
Awesome. My name's Zach. I'm one of the founders of Carbon Collective, and similar to Alex, went down a journey of looking at sustainable investing. And the fact is that sustainable investing is broken. We know in order to solve climate change over the next 30 years, we need to dramatically ramp up investments into climate solutions. And at the same time, we need to wind down investments into fossil fuels. And what Wall Street is labeling as sustainable just simply doesn't fit that reality. It is a less bad version of the world today. It is not looking ahead to what we have to build. So at Carbon Collective, we build investment portfolios that are aligned with that reality, that are diversified, they are low fee, and they're built to be safe for a retirement account, but that have a clear theory of change of what's in there. We work with individuals, and we also work with small and medium businesses to help them out.
Great. I'm Catherine Pierce, co-founder and CEO of Carbon Zero Financial. My background's actually behavioral change. So applying that lens of how do we get people to more effectively act and transact according to their concern for people and planet. So Carbon Zero Financial does that. We're a B2B fintech, which means that we work with banks, financial institutions to provide climate technology to existing credit card programs. We enable people to automatically measure, reduce, and offset their carbon footprint as they spend, exercising credit card rewards points towards offsetting, but also because I have information on how you spend, I can tell you the exact ways that you can most effectively reduce your carbon footprint. So meeting people where they are to get them where they need to be using financial data to gamify climate accountability.
I'm James. I'm the CEO of Evergrow. Our mission is to build and sustain a carbon neutral world. The way we do that is by unlocking project finance for decarbonization and new infrastructure. We need to spend on the order of $5 to $10 trillion a year investing in new things like solar and wind, yes, but also low carbon fuels, carbon capture, you name it. And the current project finance markets don't know what to do with these projects. They see them as too risky to invest in. So we write long-term price guarantees and other contracts that make these projects work from a financing perspective, thus unlocking decarbonization projects into the future. I also wanted to say thank you to the Commonwealth Club for having me and us here. When I, 5 years ago, was looking for an opportunity to get into climate, I started by coming literally to this room to listen to the tapings of the Climate One podcast, which was an incredible jumping off point for my journey. So it's great to be back.
So two things. Clearly, they've done this before. And second, from a therapy perspective, I feel much better that you guys are actually out there doing.
And that's the panel now.
Exactly. Done. I feel better. I'm good. I wanted to ask a few questions, one of which is from a social momentum perspective, do you see any steam being lost in terms of engagement around climate and dealing with climate change? Is there sort of any reactionary pushback that you're sensing in the market? If so, or if not, what are you guys doing to address it, either to amp up more interest in climate change issues or pushing back where there may be some resistance?
Yeah. I mean, is there a specific sort of like moment that you're thinking of that was steam lost? Because
well, if we look at the political climate where we're heading to in the next 2 to 4 years, there may be a change of political control in terms of power and probably implications, and that probably also reflects sentiment by virtue of that transition.
Yeah, I would start off with say that like Washington D.C. is not the U.S. and not the world, and broadly, steam is only increasing. The pressure that people are feeling to act has only been growing. Like 2 decades ago, it was a pretty lonely place, and it was me shouting at my friends to turn off lights and do things. And now, so many of them are working in some regards, not even in climate, but they're running the energy departments for their companies, or like procuring renewable energy for for large corporates, things like that. So the last few years especially, it's been growing, and every day we're seeing people wanting to work on climate or move their money or do more. So I'd say broadly it's increasing, not decreasing.
And you're totally right to say that DC is not the country nor the world. From my perspective, I founded my first company in 2015, and it's a semiconductor company, and I had been deep in climate stuff my whole life up until 2015, and then I was all in on semiconductor, stopped going to climate change conferences for a while because I needed to get this company to be successful. 5 years later, 2020 was when I kind of lifted my head up and started paying attention to climate and that conversation again. And I could not believe it. It was night and day in how people reacted to me bringing up the topic. I always felt like the crazy person in the corner being like, guys, we should be worried about this. And most people were like, oh yeah, whatever. And all of a sudden, 2020, every time I brought it up, people were leaning in and saying, yes, I'm worried too. What can we do? And the numbers back it up. So we went from 30% of Americans being worried about climate change in 2015 to over 80, I think it's 82% in 2020. And a majority of both political parties. So to your point, it's not just Democrats who want the change, it's also a majority of Republicans. It's just their politicians who aren't doing what the majority of their party wants.
Feeling better again.
So the other thought I had when you first asked the question, I thought you were going a different way with it. I thought you were bringing up the skyrocketing prices of oil and how well the fossil fuel industry is doing all of a sudden. Because that has had an impact on us. Our first product is a fund that's much like the S&P 500, except that it doesn't invest in the fossil fuel industry. And over the long term, historically, that has improved returns. But all of a sudden now, with oil prices skyrocketing, people are thinking, oh, wow, it's time to invest in fossil fuels. But with that said, I've realized it's actually a very tiny portion of people who are thinking that way. I think just the fact that people have been feeling and experiencing climate change firsthand with the wildfires and the hurricanes makes them realize, wait a second, do you want to go back into the same thing, or do we want to be a little more thoughtful about this and plan for alternatives, the renewables, the electrifying of homes, et cetera, rather than going right back to the fossil fuels that can swing this way. So,
I think Alex's comment on oil prices is really important. Something that I think is underreported is the relationship between oil and gasoline prices and carbon prices. They tend to be anti-correlated, meaning that when oil prices and gasoline prices are high, people change their behavior and they consume less, but that weirdly depresses the price of emissions. It's both a good thing in that people are emitting less, but that price signal that the price of carbon represents in the carbon markets is really, really important to a developer building their project. To give you an example, the price of the low carbon fuel standard in California was about $200 a metric ton a year and a half ago. It was $150 a metric ton on Jan 1, 2022, and it's now at about $115 as of today, generally because of sentiments around, yes, the political climate, but also in particular oil prices. And that in turn makes it really hard for the next generation of replacement fuels like biofuels developers or sustainable jet fuel producers to get their projects funded because carbon is now cheaper.
I think something I would add here, and maybe this goes a little bit to that feeling you have of like, are we stalling, is that I think the awareness of climate change is at a point where it's never been. But what that's leaving so many of us is at the top of the emotional cycle, where we say, oh my God, I'm terrified. And we still, I think, this is what you were talking about with that behavioral piece, we aren't yet good enough yet as a community to say, okay, and this is what we have to do globally, and this is what you have to do individually. It can often feel like a laundry list. I'll give a really quick example that was pretty relevant. My cousin has a third grader, and they had a play that they put on, and it was one kid after another coming out saying, I am the polar bear. I am the polar bear. Who will save me? Who will save me? I am the sea otter. I am the sea otter, etc. There wasn't, I am a solar panel. I'm a wind turbine. I am an electric car.
So there's just angst, but no.
There's no resolution, and that is the definition of climate anxiety, which can lead us just to this place of, this is horrible. I was born into a world run by fossil fuels, but we do have the way out of it, and I think so much of that is education to continue and close that loop.
And I would just actually add to that, the pillars kind of upon which we've strategized is education, innovation, automation. So once we've identified these are things about where we're all concerned, these are things that these are in fact individual and communal goals. How do we build systems around that shared intention? This is very much in fact agnostic to political party, to planet Earth is our most expansive yet common ground. I think the pandemic made it very clear we do share a certain fate. We are very aware of our susceptibility to these things, and I would say the climate consciousness is greater than it's ever been before, but the exciting opportunity is now, all right, we have this angst. In what capacity can technology, finance, data, really every industry facilitate in turning that into action? And I think that's what's brought us here today.
And you guys are all innovating. And in the spirit of innovation, you're doing obviously new things. And I hear a lot of financial services type work that's being done. What regulatory issues do you run into, if any? Because you guys are probably out a little bit ahead of where those frameworks may exist today. Maybe it's a cakewalk.
James probably started.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, where to start? Our markets exist purely as a function of regulation. You know, carbon, if you think about it, is not a physical commodity in the way that oil and gas are, right? We don't consume carbon. It doesn't work like that. And so when we say a price on carbon, what we really mean is that governments have gone out and created these markets in which emitters are limited as to how much they can emit, and that artificial scarcity, because it is artificial, creates supply and demand that mimics a regular commodity market and looks and feels, walks and quacks like a commodity market, but isn't actually one. In that absent regulation, there's literally zero value for this stuff. And I can tell a story that illuminates it. One of our early customers is a producer of sustainable jet fuel. They turn waste wood into jet fuel, and this is wood that would otherwise have died and decomposed. You'd think that a jet fuel plant would make its money selling jet fuel, but you'd be wrong. This plant makes 20% of its revenue selling jet fuel. The remaining 80% of its revenue comes from carbon credits, which are a creation of regulation. And so absent regulation, this stuff doesn't get built and just doesn't happen. So regulation is kind of the bread and butter of our business.
You're probably one of the few people who would thank regulators.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm very long regulation. I think if it were the right thing to do for people to stop emitting, we wouldn't have a climate crisis.
Yeah.
I'll pile on to that. The Department of Labor is what regulates retirement plans, these 401ks, 403bs, and they basically tell employers what they have to do to meet their fiduciary responsibility in giving investment options to their employees. And right now, the Department of Labor is in the process of developing new guidelines for that fiduciary responsibility, in which they say, hey, you know what? Climate risk is financial risk. You might not be meeting your fiduciary duty if you're not taking into account climate risk. And that will be a huge change when that does come out. And I would expect it to probably come out saying exactly that, because there was a proposed guideline that came out. It received public commentary, and that was overwhelmingly in favor. And so now it's being finalized, and I think is expected to come out saying exactly that, which is very exciting, because it kind of opens the floodgates of, okay, now employers have free rein to take into account things besides just pure risk and return measures when they're deciding what to put in 401ks.
Yeah. To further add to the pile, so the SEC put out a ruling that publicly traded companies will have to start to disclose their climate risks. And so many of the banks are publicly traded, even small community banks. And so they're looking at what's our climate risk for our lending portfolio. So we're having those conversations right now to help them out. And then also the Federal Reserve. So looking at like what is the climate risk of our institutions, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, trillions of dollars of mortgages, home mortgages, commercial mortgages across the country. Many of them are in flood zones, hurricane zones, earthquakes. So earthquakes are not necessarily climate related, but many others are. Wildfires here in California. So looking at, how do we price in that risk to mortgages? How do we buy them and then held and backed by the federal government? And then, sort of on the anti side of this is all sort of positive tailwind regulation for us here in California. We had a law passed that said all new homes starting, I think it was this year, all new homes have to have solar on it where it's feasible. But then the investor-owned utilities like PG&E based here in San Francisco put forward a proposed change to the net energy metering, how we sell back credits. And that went to the Public Utility Commission, who's considering it, which basically making it uneconomical for people to add solar. So we're forcing people to add solar, but then saying it's not going to be all that great for you economically anymore. So regulations can be a headwind or a tailwind, and we need to work together so that it's actually getting us to where we need to be.
Yeah. Regulators that conflict opinions never happen, but yeah. I think we talked about price of oil. I don't think a lot of people realize that when they put their money in a bank, one of the money center banks, a lot of that money, a shocking amount of that money actually funds fossil fuel related projects. And how have you guys done, a lot of you guys are B2B, but some of you are B2C in terms of increasing awareness of these types of issues for the purposes of acquisition from a marketing perspective and, from a mission perspective, both?
Happy to jump on this first, but I imagine, this is mainly going to be over here. It's one of the questions that we often get is, we help people invest, and you touched on this a little bit, Alex, is, there's this notion in this narrative that it is a fundamentally charitable act to invest sustainably. That when we get people all the time like, all right, I'm ready to work with Carbon Collective, and I'm going to accept a couple percentage points worth of performance. And that doesn't add up to us. We don't think that that's actually correct. When we look at kind of the long-term trajectory of fossil fuels, next 10, 20, 30 years, the macroeconomic trends tell the opposite tale. We have 50% of the oil that's consumed in the US is used on our roadways. We have a fundamentally better technology called an electric car that does not use oil. They're faster, safer, more reliable. You can drive a Tesla for over 1 million miles. In the next 5 years, they'll be cheaper to own. So where's oil's market share going with that? Solar, wind, battery, cheaper ways of generating electricity. So when it comes to investing, so much of what's important here is that narrative, because the point of divesting from an ethical perspective is to help spread that to the point where we can get those who are financially motivated to then say, oh, I'm going to switch to that too, because I believe that this is going to make more money. And that's the tipping point that I believe that we're all trying to aim for in changing where investment is allocated.
I'll just mention on the performance, since you were talking about it, we have a 10-year back test where we show our index compared to the S&P 500. What happens if all you do is remove fossil fuel companies? And our line is green and the S&P 500 is red, and ours just consistently gets higher and higher. And it just shows, I think that graph is so powerful in sharing that message of, hey, it's actually better for your pocketbook as well as for the planet to make this decision. You don't have to compromise.
And you can go back even further. I was born in 1989. If you had divested from the S&P 500 in that year up until the present, you would have made more money. That's a long time period. And that includes a decade, because investment advisors will say, oh, you hold fossil fuel companies because they're counter-cyclical. You hold them as a hedge. In the 2000s, the S&P 500 was basically flat, but the fossil fuel industry in the US was up 350%. And yet still, over that time period, those 32 years, my whole lifetime, you would have been better to divest. So the narrative that they're an important piece of a portfolio is really coming into question.
I think also, though, for us, initially we were B2C, so we were going to launch our own credit card product, after which we pivoted because it was more scalable. But for us, so much of it's also getting people back to what is money? Money is the mechanism, it's a mechanism by which we express value. We can align that with our values. I think we feel very powerless. Many of us actually don't like the companies with whom we transact. We actually feel kind of yucky about the brands from whom we shop and these various things. Changing the narrative, to your point, we have options. We can be empowered in how we spend. There are alternatives, and if we can make it easier for people to capitalize on those alternatives. Earlier, I think throughout a theme has been the ease with which people can do this. How easily can I switch to more sustainable mechanisms? So for us, the narrative is also, your money can be an alignment of your values, and there's options, and we're going to make it easier than ever to act accordingly. So that's a huge part of it. Feeling like I get to put dignity back into my dollar, I get to act with integrity, and I'm not powerless to the system.
As those responsible for running a business and at the intersection of obviously enterprise and climate change, what one, maybe two key measures do you use to determine whether you're tacking to your North Star and tacking to success or not? Is there something that you focus on?
Yeah. For us, it's dollars moved from the banks, from the big banks towards these climate positive projects. We don't care how many people sign up or don't sign up or share us out. It's how much money are we moving towards this? Because at the end of the day, that's what matters, is shifting the energy infrastructure.
For us, it's very similar. It's just dollars removed from the fossil fuel industry. Because for us, it's all about sending a message to the fossil fuel industry that it's not just business as usual. We don't want to stick with the status quo. We're not okay with what they're doing. We need a major change, and so we're taking our money away from them to send that message. So it's a very clear just how many dollars have we removed, and I think that's powerful, especially within 401ks, because people can have an amazing impact just within their own spheres of influence. let's say you work at Microsoft or at Apple. There are anywhere from $10 to $30 billion in your 401k plan alone, just within your own company. So if you can influence your benefits managers to add a single climate-friendly investment option into your company's 401k, you can pretty much single-handedly be responsible for $1 billion coming out of the fossil fuel industry. So letting people know that they can single-handedly have such a huge impact is really empowering and can really provide a counter to that climate angst and depression that is really becoming so prevalent these days. People have power, and we're helping them take that power.
Yeah, I think on that note, one of the questions we often get, and this is a little bit tangential, is, all right, I'm one person. How should I prioritize my own climate actions? Like, do I be vegan? Do I bike to work today? What do you do? And for us, what we like to say is take the time to pick up the big parts of your life. So like banking, for instance. Changing your bank kind of sucks. Let's be honest. You have to like do all those things.
No, it can be pretty easy. It can be pretty easy.
You have to reconnect all these things, but don't worry. I'm going to give you a good plug here.
He makes it super easy.
He makes it super easy. But you pick up the decision, you look at it from all angles, and then you do it, and then you're done. Then you're just banking. You're living your life. You're not having to think every day, because decision fatigue is such an important part of that. So whether it's your banking, whether it's where you're investing, how you source your electricity, how you transport yourself, how you cook your food, these are big one-time decisions that have decades of impact in making. So do the big stuff, pick it up, take the time with it, but then put it down, and you get to go on living your life.
Yeah, I think we think a lot about kind of lowering carbon impact, raising carbon consciousness. And so one is the reallocation of resources. Are people actually diverting their buying power such that they're either offsetting, but ideally actually just shopping more sustainably? So in our affiliate marketplace, kind of targeting people and saying, we're seeing how you're shopping. I'm going to get you the best discount possible to shop more sustainably with this brand. And those high ticket items like clean energy, energy efficient appliances. So for us, it's very much about the reallocation of resources such that people are making better decisions. And then also, I mean, again, behavioral change, that also is kind of the psyche of what do people feel like their relationship to climate is. When people are disempowered, they're less likely to hold other stakeholders accountable. However, when they feel like they are gradually contributing to the solution, there's some indignation there. And then they go to their employer and they say, what's up with my 401k? Then they go to their politicians and they say, what's up with this policy? So gradually making people feel like they are mobilizing and they are in fact part of the solution really has huge implications. So it's both for us the actual dollars and cents, and then what are people's own relationships to climate as a concept?
For us, we just look at how much a project that we helped finance reduces or abates over its lifetime, and we measure our success by reference to that. Our goal is to get to a gigaton by 2030.
So I'm getting a very Starve the Beast vibe. And I guess akin to that is what probably happened with investments in South Africa, several decades ago, or the tobacco industry several decades ago as well. And as entrepreneurs in this environment, as we sit here in April 2022, what are your biggest challenges, beyond climate change, just developing and growing your business?
Yeah. I mean,
Let's keep everybody up.
Yeah, I want to just jump in. One, it's not just starving the beast, but it's because that's just the divestment part. It's also the investment. It's like we need to, all of us are also focused on what's the positive. Where do we want to go? Mm-hmm. Because if you just, go fossil free, if you just stop, then you're stopped. It's like, where do we need to go, and what can we all do together? So I want to make that point. And it's like, beyond climate change, what's the challenge of growing a business? We all have young companies. It's all, just some of us a few years old, some of us months old. So it's doing all of the things all at once, and it's the prioritization. And how do you not get distracted by the shiny things that come along to say, it's like, do this instead. It's like always moving forward towards that goal.
I'll say hiring, and especially hiring thoughtfully, is tough. And I'll put out a plug to anybody who isn't in a climate-related job and who wants to be. We're looking for you, and it's okay if you don't have experience in climate. For me now in the financial industry, I'm looking for people with a lot of experience in finance who can get passionate about climate and be able to talk about it in an intelligent way. And you don't have to have a background to be able to do that. You just need the passion. So if you're thinking about a career change, go for it. We need you. There are a lot of jobs.
Yeah, I think for us, there's just a level of faith that you have to have with your hypotheses of this is, you've done enough customer discovery and trying to understand, and then seeing if these bets are going to play out that you're making. We're just starting to see some of those. For example, my co-founder met some friends for the first time, and he was explaining what he did, and they said, "Oh, you mean Carbon Collective?" And we're like, "Oh my God, that's incredible that you knew about this externally." And so it's some of those bets of and being clear, this is what we're doing, and we might not see results from it in 6 months to 12 months, but we're going to make it and stick to it.
I echo all of that. I would, even almost from a philosophical standpoint on something I wrestle with a lot is sustainability doesn't just though pertain to natural resources like trees and whatnot. We too are resources. And in what capacity, when you're running a company, are you unsustainable? Are you asking for people to extract more than is fair? So what does it look like to run a sustainable company vis-a-vis how you treat your employees and the policies you have? And I think that this crisis demands such urgency, so tempering the urgency with which we have to act with the reality that we too need to be modeling, I think, sustainability in how we organize companies. How many days a week are they working? What is so tempering that such that the emotional and actual time burden placed on employees isn't actually unsustainable.
So if anyone ever asked that, I would have more hair and it would be more black and gray. But yeah, go ahead, James.
No, mine is echoing Alex's, which is hiring. If I would add a twist to it, because I think everything that the panel said is right, and I would agree with. So for the sake of originality, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who also runs a company, not in climate, and I was talking to him because I took 5 years off in between my first and second companies, which this is. And I said, man, I've forgotten that from the outside looking in at a startup, it's really easy to armchair quarterback it and say, oh, keep your hiring bar high, keep your hiring bar high. And then you run a company or you work at a company and you realize, man, the forces that act upon you to want to lower your bar are actually really, really strong, we are an in-person San Francisco, 4 days a week in the office, high-performing team, but we have so many open roles. And so you start to think, well, how many of these core things are really core? And we have someone who ticks 8 of the 10 boxes, but we said we're going to keep the bar really high. And so that's a really, really tough behind-the-curtain conversation that we have almost daily.
That's great to hear. I mean, it's good that you guys, have been navigating these challenges and are forging ahead, and everyone seems still, committed and not dejected, which is great. And I feel better now, so thank you, which is the whole purpose of this panel. So with that, I want to thank everybody. Hopefully you learned something like I did from this amazing group of 5 folks here. Great.
All right. Well, thank you all. Let's see. They need another hand because managing a stage of 6 professionals that actually want to talk a lot and want to talk about the amazing stuff they're doing is a challenge. But I just want to thank you all and the work you're doing, which is incredible. So thank you all. And we actually are, we really want you to stick around because we are going to do a social event, and these folks will be around after the event. So please don't go anywhere. We have one final speaker we just really want to introduce you to. So thank you all. I do want to highlight. Go ahead. Yeah, get off the stage.
That's dismissed.
Just sitting there. Thank you.
So we've had this trajectory here. We've talked a little bit about climate like tacit things we can do. We heard about selling NFTs to support the environment. And then we talked about really some financial and some structural things that we can do. And at this point, I really want to dive into kind of a little more of the social side. And it's really a pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker, but also our awardee for this year. And just for context, I have to read this because it's really important. But we give away an award every year. It's called the Harari Award. And it's centered around this idea of conscious leadership, social entrepreneurship. And so we talk a lot about, at the University of San Francisco, about being an entrepreneur isn't just actually doing well and doing good. So I always say, like, that's what you do when you prop up your .org. It doesn't mean that your company has values. It means that you're maybe doing this thing on the side. And we talk a lot about, well, maybe the opposite is actually doing well by doing good, by embedding those values, whether in that social, cultural, environmental, in your company. And we have an award centered around someone who's dedicated a career to that, that ethos of leading socially conscious companies. And so this year we want to give the award. It's the first time we've ever given an award to a woman. She's an international expert in social, gender equity, economic justice issues, a career working in executive roles at the Ford Foundation, Outright Action, Political Research Associates, but also a lot of board experience and just giving back to communities. Member of the Board of Trustees at the American LGBTQ Museum, or LGBTQ Plus Museum, the funders of Reproductive Equity, Voices for Profit, Cal Nonprofits, on all of those boards, and also CEO of the California Women's Foundation. And just for context, the Women's Foundation is really focused on advancing and building community-based investing, community-based organizations, and training community leaders who are women and mobilizing women. And I think what inspires me about our award today is we've seen so many powerful, young and older women here today. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Serena Khan, my friend, auntie to my children who are here, and really just...
Thank you so much.
So let's just make sure we get this in front of you, Serena. It's so proud of you. So Serena.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Billy, and to all of you for having me here. It's really an honor for me to accept this award because of leadership is so important to me. And this award, what it stands for, as I understand it, is integrity, authenticity, and social innovation. And these are all qualities that I aspire to in my own leadership, along with generosity, compassion, and joy. And as CEO of Women's Foundation California, we are a publicly supported foundation advancing gender, racial, and economic justice by investing in, training, and connecting community-based leaders. And our operating principles are grounded in feminist practices. So I was really happy to hear in this last panel about issues around hiring, issues around policies and practices in organizations. That's something that we pay a lot of attention to. And also that our fundamental belief that we were founded upon in 1979 is that people who are closest to the problems in their communities are also closest to the solution. So that's where we need to be looking for innovation. And that's who we are funding: community-based women, trans women, gender nonconforming women who are leading the way. And I see some of the most exciting social innovation coming from women. Trans women, gender nonconforming folks, our community partners, organizations and leaders who we fund, and grassroots community leaders who we train to be effective policy advocates through our Solis Policy Institute. These are leaders who've increased access to renewable energy for low-income communities in California. So that means that 35% of California funds for renewable energy are going to low-income communities as a result of our community leaders. These are leaders who have to address environmental justice in their in their general plans, and also protecting farm workers from overexposure to dangerous pesticides. And we hopefully all know that the reality is that research shows that societies with the least gender equality are the most vulnerable to climate change. The result is that women and girls bear the brunt of floods, windstorms, droughts, wildfires, and heat waves, and slower changes to our seas, land, and agriculture. A staggering 80% of those displaced by climate change are women and girls. And women and children are 14 times more likely than men to die during a natural disaster. So it's imperative that we center women and girls in our response to climate change. California, we all know, is a state of innovation. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, with some of the most progressive policies in the country, and yet we also have some of the highest poverty rates in the world. And the majority of people who are living in poverty in California are women of color and their children. And so the success of California and the problems of California all involve women. Women are leading the way, and women are most impacted by the injustice that we see here. I recently learned about something called the No Regrets Initiative, which is a relationship-centered approach to land and asset management, leading with regenerative agriculture, and it's an effort led by women that can be a model for others to use. And so in our work, we question the status quo at every turn. We're striving to dismantle structures of patriarchy and white supremacy. And as we look outward to our community partners, we also look inward to our own organizational practices to make sure that they're grounded in feminist practices and management. So just to build on what was said in the last panel is that we take a trust-based approach to our philanthropy. So the philanthropic sector is way behind what we are doing in the sense that we don't even require grant applications. We'll take them over the phone. We want movement leaders to be focused on their work and not the bureaucracies of applying for funding. So we've cut out the unnecessary bureaucracies of applying for and reporting on funding. We don't require reports. We want to build relationship with our community leaders and a partnership so that they can focus on their work. And we also take a trust-based approach to managing our team. So what does a feminist organization, feminist principles and practices of management look like for us is how we support our team. How we center wellness. So as the rest of the country and maybe the world is experiencing the Great Resignation, we've been experiencing the Great Retention. Ever since the pandemic started, we've had only 2 people out of a staff of 25 leave, one to pursue graduate school and another to pursue another opportunity. The rest of our team has stayed. Why is that? Because we center wellness. And that for us means a 4-day, 32-hour work week, a flexible schedule, 6 months of family leave to bond with a new child or to take care of loved ones, technology benefits, a wellness stipend. We used to have, like many organizations, a fitness stipend where you had to show every month your gym membership to get reimbursed $50. And what we found is that about 7 people were not opting into that benefit. And so we said, let's make it an opt-out benefit. It's just going to show up in your paycheck, and if you don't want it, you can let us know. Well, 100% of people are taking advantage of the wellness benefit, and it's not just for fitness, it's about wellness, so people can use it for any way that they define that. And it might be taking themselves out to dinner, or it might be about taking a yoga class, or it might be about a gym membership. It doesn't matter. What wellness is to them is what matters. We have a philanthropy match because we want to build a culture of philanthropy. We have a retirement match. We post our salary ranges. I think that's a very important practice because it contributes to the gender pay gap when people don't post salary ranges. I won't even when recruiters call me, I say, I won't forward this to my networks unless you post the salary range. I've started doing that very recently. And we also, while we value education, we don't require a college degree to come work for Women's Foundation California. Because again, it goes back to the principles of those who are closest to the problems are closest to the solution. So if we're trying to reform, for example, the criminal justice system, it might be somebody who's had experience, has been previously incarcerated, who might have some of the best ideas about how to reform that, and they may not have had the opportunity to finish their education because of issues to do with poverty, homelessness, addiction. And so we want to make sure that we are really values aligned, and to that end, again, in the last panel, our investments, 100% of them are invested in portfolios that advance gender equity, gender justice, racial justice, and climate justice. Our banking, same thing. We got out of the big banks. We're at Beneficial State Bank, and there's a lot of progressive banks, but for us, it comes down to gender. So we looked at, for example, Amalgamated Bank, and we looked at Beneficial State Bank. Both are great progressive banks. One is led by a woman, and so we went with that one. So my message to you today is to invest in women's leadership, to center women, to engage women. Women are leading the way, and this is despite the fact that less than 2% of philanthropic dollars go to women and girls, and despite the fact that less than 2% of venture capital funds go to women-owned startups. So it gives me great pleasure to accept this award, especially because, as Billy said, this is the first time that the Harari Award has gone to a woman, and I do hope that there will be many more women who receive this award in years to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Serena. I think that I would be remiss to put a capstone on that because there are so many wonderful nuggets there. But I do want to just end us off with a thank you to Serena for allowing us to honor you, and a thank you to our team, Danielle, Susan, Nathan, Tanya, for helping me make this event happen, and to all the speakers. And I think the challenge that Serena ended on is really tacit and important. And so if you have something to write with, or you can anchor something in your head, I contemplated, how can we get this to stick? Can we create sticky knowledge? Because at the end of the day, I'm a teacher, and there's many teachers in the audience. Do we have people sign pledge cards when they leave? But what I want you to do is just think about, what can you do? I think you heard from Diane Hagan about, can you support a woman-owned regenerative agriculture business? Can you do as Serena suggested, and some of our panelists up here suggested, is change your bank? Can you place your 401k in another institution? Can you think about, if you're leading an organization, having more progressive practices that support reproductive rights? How can you think about what you do differently? Can you think about test driving an electric vehicle? Can you think about planting a tree? So what I'd like you to do is, just as you're going home tonight, as you're leaving this venue, think about one discrete action that you can take that can make the world a better place, but also can help address climate change in your own world. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. We invite those of you here in the audience to the rooftop deck on a beautiful day in San Francisco for some treats that Diana Hagan has provided. We have a flat of cheese that she's provided and some drinks, and we would thank you, Diana, and thank you all for being here, and hopefully we'll see you on the roof for a nice soiree. Thank you.